Hello and welcome to the recording of the Infosession First Steps in Self-Employment. This event was co-hosted by touring artists and is part of the event series Get Started Self-Employment in the Arts and Creative Industries. With this series, we offer insights into various topics for your start into self-employment in Germany. And in this first info session, our speaker Sebastian Hoffmann gives an overview about the important steps you need to take when starting into self-employment. He explains the difference between freelancing and self-employment and the different types of freelancing. And he explains how to register your self-employment, how to write an invoice, and gives important information about income tax and VAT. Unfortunately, we had technical problems with the recording at the beginning, so the very first part is missing, but this is only 5 to 10 minutes. But it explains why the video starts very suddenly. Yeah, we hope that this video will help you with your start into self-employment and you enjoy watching it.
So here I kind of contrasted the two statuses. On the left-hand side, we have strong criteria or strong indicators that you actually are an employee or that you have to be treated like an employee. And on the right-hand side, we have indicators that you're working like a freelancer. And the important thing is that this kind of question, am I a freelancer or am I an employee, must be asked for every single contract you have. Because as I said earlier, a lot of artists are often working in both statuses at the same time. So depending on your actual lived contractual relationship with your contract partner, you always have to check and think about this. Maybe let's start with employment, the kind of indicators that you are an employee or should be treated as an employee. You're dependent on your employer. You're especially economically dependent on your employer. This would be one indicator. Another very strong indicator is that your employer decides how, when, and where you work. If there is a certain hierarchy, if you have a boss who tells you what to do, then you have to be employed. Fixed hours is also a strong indicator. If you have no equipment that you own, but it's all provided to you by your employer client. And if there is a very strong integration into your employer's business structure. For example, you have to go to the office every morning at a fixed time, and you have to participate at staff meetings all the time, for example. And in the cultural or artistic world, employment is quite standard or regular in the film industry or in the TV industry. So if you work on set during a movie or TV or advertisement, commercial shoot, then you're usually employed because you're so integrated into the production and you don't really have a say on how you work. There's somebody above you who decides. The same goes for, in most cases, dancers working in a larger dance company, actors and actresses working for state theaters, or musicians who are part of an orchestra. They're also usually employed. Looking at freelancing or self-employment on the right-hand side, it's basically the other way around. So if you have a very strong independence regarding your own decision-making process, regarding how you work, where you work, when you work, if you can work for other clients as well, and if you have this kind of entrepreneurial risk, if you invest in your own activities, in your own work, and if you organize your projects, how you work yourself, if you own your own equipment, and if you also actively advertise yourself to get more clients.
Sebastian?
Yeah.
Sorry, I think like right now the Ukrainian interpreting is not working, so maybe we can.
I'm just gonna stop.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just changed to the other channel. And now it works again.
Okay, cool.
Okay.
Okay, cool. Also, let me know if I should speak slower for the interpreters. Okay, I'm just going to continue.
Yes, I
Okay,
think
great.
so.
Cool. So if all of those indicators or most of them apply to your work situation, then you are considered self-employed or freelancer. And in this case, you don't have an employer, but you have clients or customers. And in the arts and culture scene, this is usually the case for visual artists and for independent musicians and performing artists in the theater and dance world, mostly in the kind of independent scene. Okay, and let's look also on the more like formal differences, because I think this is quite important as well. What are the actual differences between those two statuses? What do you have to do as a freelancer, what you maybe don't have to do as an employee? So maybe let's also start with employees. Employees are quite well off in a way because they automatically have access to social security. Through their employment contract, they get public health insurance, long-term care insurance, they pay into the pension and unemployment insurances, they have accident insurance, and so on. There's one exception to this. If you only have a so-called mini job with a monthly salary of maximum 520 euros, then you don't have this access to social security. But mini jobs are also more seen as a side job to a main job. If you're an employee, your income tax is automatically paid and deducted by your employer and paid to the tax office. In German, this is called Lohnsteuer, payroll tax, wage tax. As an employee, you have rights. You have a right for paid holidays. If you become unemployed, you can get unemployment benefits after 12 months, or if you've been employed for 12 months. And you also have automatic accident insurance. And the best thing about all of this is you don't really have to do anything for it, but your employer does all the administrative and bureaucratic things for you. They are responsible for paying all the contributions to the insurance companies, for example. If you're a freelancer, if you're self-employed, then you have a lot of responsibilities yourself. So the first step, which we're going to talk about later as well in detail, is you have to sign up with the tax office and let them know that now you're working as a freelancer. And the result is getting a special freelance tax number. As a freelancer, you also have to file a tax declaration to let the tax office know how much money you earned, and then pay income tax on your profit. More on that later as well. As a freelancer, you're also responsible to sign up and pay for your own health insurance. You don't get paid holidays. You don't have accident insurance, but you can buy it, of course. And you only have very, very limited access to unemployment insurance. And the last thing is that when you register your self-employment, you also have to check in what category you're in, if you're freiberuflich or gewerblich. And this distinction, like what am I, is going to be the topic of the next part. But before we jump there, I think now is the space for your questions. Well, one thing before the questions, I just wanted to let you know that if you're not sure about your status, like if you maybe think that you should be treated as an employee, but maybe your employer or your client refuses to employ you and says that no freelance contract is okay, then we recommend that you get in touch with BEMA. BEMA is a free consultation service for the rights of workers in Berlin. And they can help you to find out what the situation is. So just as a small recommendation, we have received very good feedback on the work that they do, and they also offer their services in various languages. So if you're unsure about your status, then BEMA is a good place for you to get help. Yeah, and I think now I'm going to open the floor for the first questions, but only on this kind of general question, like, am I actually a freelancer or am I an employee?
So there was already a question to the tax number. Should we?
We'll come to it later.
Yeah, okay. So this was the first one, and then there was one, being a model and being signed with modeling agency means freelancing?
It depends, unfortunately. It's, as I said earlier, it's always like a contract by contract thing. I would need to look it up. I remember that I looked it up a long time ago, but it really depends how kind of integrated or embedded you are in the modeling agency. And how much you can decide yourself regarding how you work. So this is something that I think I cannot answer now because it really depends on your individual contract. Maybe also something that you can ask BEMA actually.
Okay. So there's one question. I'm working for a company as an employee. I also got a tax number for freelance. Can I work as employee for a company and also have a freelance project?
Yes, that's possible in general. There's just two things you need to, or four things that you need to watch out for. The first thing is you should check in your employment contract if your employer allows you to do it. Usually that's the case, but I recommend that you just have this conversation with your employer, just to let them know that you're also working as a freelancer on the side. It's usually no problem, especially if your employment contract and your freelance activity are in two very different fields. The second thing is you should also tell your health insurance provider. And if your employment contract is still your main activity, then there's no consequence. You don't have to pay any extra health insurance contributions for your side freelancing. It's fine. The third thing is you have to pay attention, however, to income tax. And I'll talk about this kind of hybrid thing a bit later as well when I talk about income tax. The last thing is you also have to pay attention that you're not working too much. Because in general, for all work activities combined, there's a maximum working hour regulation in Germany, maximum 48 hours per week. Of course, there are some exceptions to that if you work on the weekend as well and so on. But this is just something to keep in the back of your head. 48 hours is on average, the maximum amount that you are allowed to work. Also for your own health and safety.
Yes, that's true. Another question is, does a solo entrepreneur mean you have registered a business like a UG? Or in other words, if you are the solo founder of a UG with no employees, who does freelance work as a small company? Or are you a solo entrepreneur? Maybe should I repeat the question? Or
I think it's okay. Yeah. Okay. I think there's a difference between what I'm going to talk about today, basically, which is solo self-employed people or Einzelunternehmerinnen. They don't have a specific legal form or entity. So you as a person are the business. And this is different from actually creating a legal entity like an UG or GmbH or something. And this is something that I'm not going to cover today because it's a topic for another 2 hours. But in Germany, it's basically possible to be self-employed without having to create this legal entity. You are, as a person, the business.
Yeah, okay, perfect. And here's one question. How about an online language school? I don't know exactly when this question came up, but
Yeah,
yeah.
maybe also to like regarding language schools, it depends. Every school works differently. Some language teachers are employees. For example, if they cannot really decide on the content of the classes or courses, if they have to attend staff meetings, if they cannot really decide how and when they work, and they are probably considered employees. But a lot of language teachers are also offering their own content. They decide what they teach, and they also make their own hours, or they just pick whatever available hours they are offered by a private school that they work for. And in this relationship with the school, they can, of course, also be considered freelancers. So I think this is a good example to show you that the activity like teacher doesn't really say anything about the question, are you an employee or are you a freelancer? But it always depends on the actual lived work that you do.
And I think, yeah, this answered already the question, can students work as freelancers? So I hope that that's, but maybe you can explain again.
I think this is more like it can also touch the subject of immigration, because if you're a non-EU student and you're not covered by paragraph 24, temporary protection, and yeah, if you're not from the EU, then legally you actually cannot work as a freelancer. You can only work as an employee, but you can ask your immigration office to give you permission to work as a freelancer. And this is usually the case if you can somehow convince the immigration office that your freelance activity will not interfere with the completion of your degree, or if it's somehow related to your degree. This can be a good bonus point if you want to apply for this permission. But if you're an EU citizen, or if you have a residence permit for temporary protection, then you can, of course, work as a freelancer. That's no problem, because from an immigration standpoint, it's allowed.
Yeah, there are a lot of more questions regarding when am I a freelancer? So I don't know how, like, if I should ask you like all of these questions, or if we can maybe sum it up a little bit. Because like here it's like, can an interior designer, what is better for me, how it works here? Can a curator or artist be a freelancer? Like these are all regarding the freelancer thing.
My answer is sure, of course. It's all a possibility, but it always depends on the relationship with your clients. Like if you're an interior designer, if you are working like an entrepreneur, if you make all the decisions, then you are self-employed, then you are a freelancer. But if you work for an interior design company and you have a boss and that boss tells you what to do, then you're probably an employee of the interior design company. And the same basically goes for any other activity. So it's always this question, how much freedom do you have to decide? And if you have a large degree of freedom, then it's very likely that you are a freelancer, self-employed. But if you don't really have a lot of freedom or independence, then it's likely that you are an employee. Hopefully that answered all the questions.
Yeah, perfect. And this is a little bit more detailed question. Is it possible to be a freelancer in Germany as a refugee and still get 450 euros as a financial support from the government? And how does the government regulates it? If I earn more than 520 euros per month, do I get payments back?
I cannot answer that because it's not really the topic of this workshop, but there is going to be a workshop on the job center. So I think we should move this question to the other workshop.
So this workshop is on the 8th of November, just for you to, And yeah, this is somehow a similar question. Did I understand it correctly? If I'm registered as a freelancer, I cannot go for extra work, for example, as a barman. Like this is.
Oh, you can, of course, no problem. You can, and this is actually very standard. It's very normal for many people to be both an employee working in one field or for one job, and at the same time also working as a freelancer, working as a self-employed person. It's very standard. As a non-EU citizen, you just need to watch out or pay attention if it's allowed by your immigration status, because not all residence permits allow you to work as a freelancer and as an employee. But if you're protected by paragraph 24, special temporary protection, then you can do anything. So you have complete access to the German labor market, meaning you can work both as a freelancer and as an employee, or both at the same time. Okay.
Perfect. And then there is one question,
Yeah.
if there is a difference between the term Freiberufler and Kleinunternehmer.
Yeah, we'll come to that in the next topics, actually. So Freiberufler is one of the two kind of subcategories of self-employment, of freelancing. And Kleinunternehmer is not a legal status, but it's the name, or it describes your relationship to value-added tax. And we're going to talk about this in the section on value-added tax towards the end. So freiberuflich and Kleinunternehmer, they're from different planets, the two terms.
Yeah, and I think all the others are regarding like registering and tax. So
come to that later.
We'll come to them later on. Yeah.
So then I think I'm going to switch to the next topic, 2 out of 6. And this actually already refers to the last question, to this freiberuflich. So now we're going to look at the two kind of subcategories of self-employment, of freelancing in Germany. In German, they're called Gewerbe and freier Beruf, or gewerblich, freiberuflich. And it's very, very difficult to find good translations for these two terms, even in English. And on the internet, you will find those two terms translated very differently. And sometimes Gewerbe is translated as self-employment. Freier Beruf is often translated as freelance. But as I try to present it to you, freelancing and self-employment is the kind of main category. It's the opposite of employment. And Gewerbe, freier Beruf are the two subcategories of self-employment freelancing. And my preferred translations into English would be business or trade style self-employment freelancing for Gewerbe, and liberal profession style freelancing self-employment for freier Beruf. Now we're going to look a little bit into the difference between the two, and then also check what you are, on which of those two categories your activity is maybe in. So Gewerbe, from a more administrative point of view, is connected to a little bit of more work for you. Because if your freelance activity is gewerblich, is a Gewerbe, then you also have to register it at your local trade office, the so-called Gewerbeamt, for a small one-time fee. I think in Berlin, it's 26 euros. If you're Gewerbe, you also kind of automatically become a member of the Chamber of Industry and Commerce, Industrie- und Handelskammer in German, IHK. And if you start earning quite a bit of money, you also have to pay membership contributions to this organization. If you're not earning a lot, you don't have to pay anything. But this organization is good for you because it's a lobby, it's an advocacy organization for businesses. And it can also help you with advice and workshops and so on. If you're Gewerbe, you also have to pay a special Gewerbe or trade tax, but only if your profit from your Gewerbe activity is higher than 24,500 euros per year. This type of tax is not an additional tax for you because it's kind of offset against income tax up to a quite high limit of around 100,000 euros. So it's not more tax, it's just more like a replacement of income tax for most people. And as you see here, for freie Berufe, if your activity is considered freiberuflich, then you don't have to do any of these things. You don't have to register with the trade office. There's no membership with the Industrie- und Handelskammer, and you don't have to pay trade tax. So this is the general difference. But again, for both activities, your work status is solo self-employed. You are a solo entrepreneur. You don't create your own company like an UG, no legal entity, but you are the business. And now let's look into this question, what am I? What are you? Maybe starting with the freie Berufe, because they're more like the special activities. Your activity is usually considered freiberuflich if it requires a special skill or education. Classic examples include doctor, lawyer, tax advisor. If you're a visual artist or designer, you are usually also considered freiberuflich if you're creating new works of art. So not just copies, but if whatever you create has never been there before. You're also usually considered freiberuflich if you're a performing artist, dancer, musician, singer, actress, actor, if you're working in artistic contexts, like for example, at a theater festival, at a music venue, but not so much if you're a singer who sings at weddings or birthday parties, then you're usually not considered freiberuflich. A lot of trainers, teachers, language teachers, etc. are also considered freiberuflich. And Gewerbe, the other category, is basically any other activity that is not considered freiberuflich. So most other service providers, but also everyone selling physical items, selling goods to private consumers, especially also if you run an online shop, then you're always considered a Gewerbe. In the arts and culture world, this also includes everyone working as a distributor, like a gallerist, a music label owner, a production or management company, or an agency. These are all considered Gewerbe. So, and if you're a Gewerbe, again, it's just a little bit more to do, but in general, it doesn't really matter so much if you're freiberuflich or gewerblich, because for most other things, it works exactly the same. So I know that a lot of people really want to try to be considered freiberuflich. And in some cases, it doesn't really work out. But I'm trying to give you maybe this recommendation that it doesn't matter so much because it's just a little bit more work. But again, for most things, the two categories work exactly the same. Okay, so this was the quick interlude on freiberuflich versus gewerblich. Are there any specific questions on that?
Yes, there is one question. I am organizing and curating a festival. Do I need to register as a Gewerbe in order to pay the artists?
Yes, especially if you're selling tickets. Because if you're selling tickets, you are a distributor, and you're selling, tickets to private consumers. So yes, that would be a Gewerbe.
Okay, perfect. And there's a second question. I am the founder of an online school. Which species do I belong to?
I like the word species. So if you, it kind of depends, I would say. If you're just running the language school yourself and there's nobody else working there, then probably freiberuflich, because you're a teacher. But if you're also employing other people in the school, then you would be a Gewerbe.
Okay, perfect. And then there is a little confusion. I'm a little confused with the difference between a UG and Gewerbe, because it seems like the examples, management agency, gallery, are businesses? Question mark.
So again, UG can be gewerblich or freiberuflich. So the UG is just a word for a legal entity. And this applies to any legal entity. You can also have a GBR, Gesellschaft bürgerlichen Rechtes, which is either gewerblich or freiberuflich. But it really depends what type of service you offer, what you sell, if you're considered freiberuflich or gewerblich. So if the UG is selling management services, then it's both an UG and a Gewerbe. It's a gewerbliche UG.
Yeah.
And maybe the confusion is in a way this kind of translation, because I used business trade for Gewerbe, but it just means what I'm trying to say. It's a freelance, it's a solo self-employed activity that is more like a business or trading style activity, as opposed to freiberufliche activities. But Gewerbe in itself is not a legal entity. It's just one of the two ways of working as a business or as a solo self-employed person.
Yeah, perfect.
Okay.
Thank you. And then there is one question. If you're a Gewerbe, you pay your own health insurance?
Yes, because you're self-employed. And if that's your main activity, then you have to pay your own health insurance. It's exactly the same as for Freiberufler. There's no difference, because both are kind of subcategories of self-employment.
Yeah, cool. So, and then I think it's pretty similar to the question that we have before, but I read it anyway. So as an illustrator selling prints online and printed objects e-commerce, I need to register as Gewerbe.
Yes.
This needs to be registered at Finanzamt?
Both Gewerbeamt and Finanzamt. As a Gewerbe, you have to do two things. You have to register it at the trade office, the Gewerbeamt, and at the tax office at the Finanzamt. If you're freiberuflich, just one, just the Finanzamt, but details on that later as well.
Perfect, cool. So, and as the other question is, as I know, freelance can gain fixed price per month. Is this right? About 400 per month.
I think this maybe relates to the job center again. Is that possible?
Yeah, that could be.
Yeah.
Yeah, about this, because this 500, like it seems like it is the job center. Yeah. So for you two who asked this question, we have another info session on the 8th of November where we, it's around ins and outs job center, where we discuss these questions, if it's related to the job center. If not, just write another question and maybe, yeah, write it in a different way that we can understand it better. Cool.
Okay.
So,
shall we switch to the next? Okay.
Yeah, I think there's one more. Here's one question. Can I be both? Gewerbe for one project and Freiberufler for another?
Yes, you can, but then you would actually have two separate freelance or self-employment tax numbers. And you would also have to do kind of two accounting systems at the same time for your Gewerbe and your freier Beruf. That's totally possible. If your activities are somehow related, then you can also just combine all of them into one Gewerbe. So if your freelance, freiberufliche activities, you can also just say, well, it's a Gewerbe. It doesn't matter. If it's a Gewerbe, if you register them as a Gewerbe, nobody will have any issues with that. The problem is more if you want to register your activities as freiberuflich, then maybe the tax office will say, no, they're not, they're gewerblich. But if you just say it's all a Gewerbe, then all is good.
Okay, great. Yeah, I think we can move on to the other, like every question who is coming now, we can ask them at the very end. So there's room for questions there.
Okay, cool, okay. So we're almost halfway there already. 3 out of 6. We're now looking at this big question, how to register. So, and as I said earlier, there's a difference regarding your subcategory of self-employment or freelancing. If your activity is a freier Beruf, it's a freiberuflich, then the only thing you have to do is fill out a form online. And you can do this via the German tax system's official website, which is called Elster. The questionnaire or form is called Fragebogen zur steuerlichen Erfassung, which roughly translates to tax registration questionnaire. And if you're Gewerbe, then you have to do that as well. But in addition, you also have to register at your local trade office, at the Gewerbeamt, for a small fee. So I'm not going to go into detail about every single section of this questionnaire, but the 4 most important things are, in this questionnaire, in the Fragebogen zur steuerlichen Erfassung, you basically tell your local tax office that you started a specific freelance or self-employed activity, because they don't know yet. So you have to tell them. You also will estimate or guess your profit from your self-employed freelance activity. And as a result, the tax office will maybe say that you already have to pay income tax in advance every 3 months, so on a quarterly basis. This probably won't happen if you estimate that your profit will be quite low. So even if you say, oh, I'm going to make 6,000 euros in the year profits, then it's quite likely that you don't have to pay anything in advance. But if you say, I'm going to earn 25,000 euros, then it's quite possible that the tax office will already make you pay income tax in advance. That's nothing bad per se. It's more like a cash flow issue maybe for some, but this is basically just income tax that you already paid. So when you declare your profits and then, the result is you have to pay some income tax, then you already paid it in these quarterly advance income tax payments. One thing that's incredibly important, however, is that in this questionnaire, in this form, you can determine your relationship towards value-added tax or VAT in Germany. And we're going to have a long segment on this. It's the last segment on VAT, so I'm not going to go into detail now, but I'm going to explain it later. But in this form, you're going to make a very important decision regarding your solo entrepreneurship, so to say. And the 4th thing that's also quite important is if you have clients in the European Union, or if you buy services from businesses in the European Union, you need another special tax number. For cross-border or intra-European Union invoicing as a seller, but also as a buyer. And you can apply for this number, which is called the International VAT ID number, in this questionnaire as well. You can also do it later, but if you will have intra-European Union transactions with clients, if you're selling or buying, then you can already get this number in this form. once you submit this form online, your local tax office, your Finanzamt, will send you a letter. And this letter contains your freelance tax number, which confusingly is just called Steuernummer in German, so just tax number. But this is a number that's very important for you, because without this number, you cannot send your clients a correct invoice. So super important that you have this number. Without this special freelance tax number, you cannot send a correct invoice. And since this process can cause a lot of questions, here are some, or wait, before I go to, maybe let's go to the tax numbers first, I'm sorry. So since I talked so much about tax numbers, maybe here's just a little overview of the 3 different tax numbers that exist in Germany. So the first one is a number that you probably already all have. This is in German, the Steueridentifikationsnummer, or tax identification number. And this is a number that you automatically get after registering an address in Germany for the first time, after you do your Anmeldung. Or if you're born in Germany, you get it automatically after you're born. This number will be your number for life. It will never change. But you can only use it in the context of employment contracts, not to invoice your clients, not for your freelance or self-employed activities. So whenever you're employed, your employer will ask you for this tax identification number, but for freelance self-employed activities, it cannot be used. It's useless. And that's why you have to apply for your freelance tax number, the Steuernummer or tax number, via this process that I just described. So this Steuernummer must be included on your invoices for freelance work. You have to apply for it by filling out the questionnaire on Elster. And this number can also change because it's connected to your local tax office. So when you're moving within Germany, or even within a bigger city like Berlin, you can have a different local tax office that's responsible for you. And if there's a different local tax office responsible for you, you will also get a new freelance tax number. You can also have more than one if you have very, very different freelance activities. But as I said earlier, if they're in the same category, you can also combine kind of related freelance activities under one freelance tax number. That's possible. And then the last tax number is this international VAT ID number, also sometimes called EU VAT ID, because it's only used in the European Union and only in the context of cross-border invoicing. So whenever you're selling something to another business, also including a freelancer, another freelancer in the EU, or if you're buying something from another business or freelancer in the EU, you need this number for correct invoicing. And since this entire process of registering your activity via this questionnaire can be a bit daunting or difficult, here's just a short kind of intro on who can help you. So, of course, you can hire a tax advisor or an accountant. That's the most expensive option. But there's also other possibilities. In Berlin, there is a specialized consultation office for freelancers who move to Germany from other countries, the so-called Lotsenstelle. You can try to get a free appointment with them. And as far as I know, they can also help you with this form. There's also a bunch of online services like Sorted. By the way, I'm not recommending them now. I just want to make you aware that they exist. I don't know if they're good or not. But what they do basically is that they are officially synced and connected to Elster and just offer you a more simplified and English language version of the questionnaire. So you can pay money to use an online service like Sorted, fill out the questionnaire via their dashboard, which is a lot easier, and then submit it via Sorted, and it's connected, linked to the official system at Elster as well. So that's another option. I also wanted to guide you to a guide in English that I think is quite well written. It's available for free online on this website, allaboutberlin.com, which is in general a pretty good resource on administrative things in Berlin and Germany. And in this guide, you basically find a step-by-step explanation on all of the different sections of this questionnaire. So don't be afraid of the questionnaire. There is help, and there are resources to help you. But it's a really important step. So you have to do it. Otherwise, you cannot invoice your clients. Okay, and I think now we have another question time.
Yes, perfect. There are some questions regarding this topic. I moved to Germany. Do I have to go to work first, or can I register as self-employed right away? Do you need a residence permit to register as a freelancer?
Yes, you would need a residence permit to register as a freelancer. And then, of course, the type of residence permit also has to allow you to be a freelancer. And that depends on the type of residence permit. If you're a refugee from Ukraine, then you usually get a residence permit according to paragraph 24 for temporary protection. And this type of permit allows you to register as a freelancer because it allows you to work in Germany without any restrictions.
Yeah, you got a huge compliment. Thank you. Your explanation is the clearest I've heard in years.
Thank you.
Another question is, if I hire teachers from Ukraine for an online language school registered in Germany, do I need to register the teachers somehow?
No, because if they're not living in Germany and not delivering their services in person in Germany, then no, because they live in Ukraine and Ukrainian labor law applies to them. But if you hire them as freelancers, you should talk to a tax advisor because you are probably liable to pay German VAT for their services, unless you have maybe your own exemption as a private language school. But this is quite detailed, so talk to a tax advisor.
Okay.
But this whole registration process as a freelancer in Germany only applies to freelancers actually living in Germany and working physically in Germany.
Yeah, cool, thank you. And I don't know if this is okay, I just, maybe it's better at another section, but I just, if they don't tell you to pay in advance, should you just wait to get a tax assessment at the end of the first year?
I would recommend to put some money on the side. Because the tax assessment is basically just your income tax declaration. And in Germany, the deadline is usually at the end of May of the next year. At the moment, it's a bit extended, but more on that later as well.
Okay, perfect. And then there is one last question now that I see regarding this topic. If I have clients outside the EU, do I need to apply for something else or get some special agreement?
No, you don't have to apply for another tax number. So good news for that. But yeah, if you have clients outside of the EU, then it can become a bit complicated. I'll also recommend to get some tax advice on that actually. But I'll talk a little bit more on that later as well when it comes to value-added tax, because that's a huge topic regarding the invoicing process.
Okay, and there is one question that came up right now. Can you advise what different types of bookkeeping is required for freelancers?
Unfortunately not, because it's really up to you and your business and how much knowledge and expertise you already have. If you need external help, that's a very individual question. And maybe just as a side note, especially in the performing arts field. So if you work as like a theater maker, for example, and if you apply for public funding, then it's also quite usual that you hire an external producer to handle accounting and finances for your funded project. And you can also, of course, include the costs for an external producer in your budget and try to get public funding for that as well. And these kind of producers usually take around 10%. So they're not tax advisors, but they're more like highly specialized accountants for public funding.
Okay, yeah, I think all the other questions are more for the others.
Okay.
So we continue, I would say.
Great. So then we're moving on to number 4 out of 6, right? Cool. So then we have this other huge question, of course, how to invoice. As a freelancer, self-employed person in Germany, you are actually obligated to create an invoice for every service or every good, every physical item that you sell. The good news is you don't have to print it out. A PDF file is enough. And you also don't have to sign your invoices. And the other good news is that you don't have to show the tax office all of your invoices as part of your tax declaration. But the tax office can ask you to see them if they are auditing you, if they are kind of checking you a bit more thoroughly. This can happen randomly, or if they suspect that you did something wrong. But the important thing is that the tax offices can do this. They can check you retroactively for 10 years. So it's highly recommended that you store all of the invoices that you wrote for 10 years. If you just send them as PDF files, then check if you can store them in a secure cloud, for example. If you send them as paper copies, then make sure that the paper copies don't disintegrate. For your invoices, you have a bit of freedom, meaning that you can create your own design. But every invoice has to include some mandatory information. Whatever font you use or font size doesn't matter, but you have to include your address. If you're just a solo entrepreneur, that's usually the same as your home address if you're working from home. But it can also be the address of a co-working space where you have a mailbox with your name on, or if you're renting an office or so, then it can also, of course, be the office address. But it's important that it's an address that you can be reached at. And of course, you have to include your freelance tax number, the number that you get after signing up or registering as a freelancer. Or, of course, if it's an invoice within the European Union, your European EU International VAT ID number. You have to include your client's address as well. And if you're sending the invoice to a business, also including other freelancers in another EU country, you also have to include their international EU VAT ID number. You also have to put a date on the invoice. When did you issue? When did you write the invoice? And you have to come up with a kind of numbering system. You can totally create your own numbering system, but it just needs to be somehow logical. So for example, you could use the year and then just 1, 2, 3, like in this example here on the slide, but you can also use a different system. And it's just important that your system is coherent. So for example, that if you issue invoice number 1, then the next one should be number 2. Because if the tax office asks and wants to actually see your invoices, again, randomly, that could be possible. And if you then submit 1 and 3, they will of course ask, where's number 2? What's also very important is that you have to include a very detailed description of whatever you're selling. So if it's a service, it should be maybe the location where you delivered the service. The service period is very important. When did you deliver the service? If it's goods that you're selling, what type of good is it? How many items? What's the quantity? And of course, what's the price? And the last very important thing that you also always have to add is information about value-added tax, about VAT. And again, we'll come to this topic in detail at the very end. But you basically either have to add VAT. In Germany, it's either 7 or 19%, or you're not adding VAT. But if you're not adding VAT, you always have to include a reason why you're not adding VAT. And there are multiple reasons for not adding VAT. And again, we'll go in detail and look at some of the reasons at the very end. Yeah, and that's pretty much it for invoicing. It's not that difficult once you maybe created your own template, found your own design, then you just need to make sure that you include all of this information on your invoices. Any questions on this? On how to invoice?
Oh, now, yes, they are. Here is one question: how to make an invoice for a person who has no tax number? The amount is under the minimum wage to pay.
That's totally fine, because maybe your client is a private individual and they cannot have a tax number. So if you're teaching, for example, and you're selling an English language class, then only you have to have a tax number. Only you as the person, as the solo entrepreneur sending the invoice, your tax number has to be on there, but your client's tax number doesn't have to be on there. The only scenario when your client's tax number has to be on there is if your client is another business, and if that business is not in Germany, but in another country in the European Union. And this relates to special cross-border invoicing rules for value-added tax. So you don't need your client's tax number unless they're another business and if they're in another European Union country.
Okay, yeah, this leads a little bit to the next question. Is there an additional tax number for invoicing clients from abroad but out of EU?
No, just within the European Union.
And is there a criteria for a date of invoice before or after the services were delivered?
Well, usually you should write the invoice soon after you delivered the service. So not before, but after the service period has ended. And I think there is some type of legal obligation. I'm not entirely sure, but I'm also not a tax advisor. So I think it's maybe like 6 weeks after the completion of the service, but this could also be different. The period could be longer. This is something that I would need to look up. But usually most freelancers, if they're providing a service, create the invoice very soon, a few days after they complete the service, because they also want to see their money.
Yeah, that's true. And yeah, another question is, should I start every year to count my invoices from one, or should I do it only once?
Well, it really depends on your own system. But if you're using this system that I put in my presentation as an example, then you would start with number one again in the next year. So it would be 2023, 1, 2023, 2, and so on. But again, you can come up with your own system. It just needs to be fairly easy to understand for someone at the tax office.
Yeah, cool. And the other question is, if I open a Gewerbe, do I need to have another bank account?
It's recommended to kind of separate your freelance business activities from your personal activities. So it doesn't really matter if it's a Gewerbe or freiberuflich. I'd recommend always having a separate business account for whatever type of self-employment you're doing.
Okay, cool. And then there is another question. If I provide online services, which place of service should I indicate?
You have to talk to a tax advisor, unfortunately. This is actually really, really difficult because especially if your clients are located outside of Germany, then there's a chance that you will actually have to register for value-added tax in the country from where your clients are logging in to your online services. So for example, if you're teaching online classes to private individuals, and if those private individuals log in from Spain, then it's likely that you will have to send them an invoice with Spanish value-added tax. But this is very, very complex. So I would really recommend that you talk to a tax advisor about this. And when you talk to a tax advisor, you can also mention the term one-stop shop, or OSS. This is a fairly new system only for European Union countries that make this process a bit easier, because it kind of eliminates the obligation to register for VAT in another country. But this is, again, very complex topic. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. There's one question. I just read it. Maybe you understand it a little bit better.
Sure.
I'm a DJ. I've been billing for my performances for 4 months now. I put on information of my invoice only the tax ID number because I didn't know how to be now.
Yeah. Well, you can, of course, do it retroactively. So you can, if you haven't done it yet, I'd highly recommend that you do it now, basically. You can also set an earlier date when you started your freelance activity. And then I would also suggest that you resubmit all the invoices with your correct freelance tax numbers to your clients, because it's also important for them. Because if they received an invoice without the correct tax number, they cannot use it as a deductible expense later for their own accounting. So it's not only important for you, but it's also important for your clients that they receive a correct invoice from you.
Okay, perfect. Now I understand the question. So perfect that you understood it so good. Yeah, perfect. So I think we can continue to the next topic. There are some more questions, but they're all regarding tax number, and sure. I think this is the next topic right now.
Yeah, we only have two topics left, basically only income tax and value-added tax. Again, just a brief introduction, but I think we're more or less okay on time. So, okay, so yeah, let's dive into the first topic. So I think it's, first of all, quite important to understand the general difference between income tax and value-added tax, because they're two completely different forms of taxation. I usually say that they live on different planets. they don't really have so much to do with each other. And first of all, yeah, we're going to learn a little bit about how income tax works in Germany. In German, it's Einkommensteuer. And this is basically the tax that you pay as a person on your income. And if you live, if you live in Germany, if you're a habitual resident in Germany, you are also considered a tax resident in Germany. So that means you have to declare and pay German income tax on your worldwide income. This is a kind of general principle. I know this is probably quite difficult for people who are not in Germany for a long time, who are just here temporarily. But if you are registered in Germany as a resident, then you also kind of automatically become a tax resident. If you're also working in your home country, then it's also maybe more like a question for a tax advisor how to deal with this. But in general, you have to pay and declare your entire income in Germany as a resident. And as a freelancer, as a self-employed person, it's your obligation to hand in an income tax declaration by July 31st, not May, sorry, I know it's wrong, for the previous calendar year, because the German tax year is the same as the calendar year, so it's January until December. And then you have almost 8 months to prepare everything and send all the information on your income to your tax office. And you have to do all of that online as well via this Elster platform, the same platform that you use to sign up or to register your freelance activity. Those deadlines are currently extended, by the way. I think for your 2022 income, the deadline next year will be in late September. The extensions are because of COVID. So let's look into this a little bit more detail for freelancers. So freelancers have to pay income tax not on all of the money they make, but only on their profit. And profit is defined as your revenue or turnover. There are so many different translations for this term. In German, it's Umsatz. So this is basically all of the amount that you invoice, all of the money that you get from your clients. And then from this amount, you deduct your professional expenses. And these are all of the costs that are connected with your freelance activity. In German, we usually call them Betriebsausgaben. So costs connected to your entrepreneurship, so to say. And the result of this calculation is your profit, or in German, your Gewinn. And you only have to pay income tax on this amount. This is also called your taxable income. So you don't pay income tax on all of the money that you make, that you invoice, but you can deduct your costs, all of the money that you spend on your professional activities, and you only have to pay income tax on what's left for you, your own profit. And of course, the huge question now is, what are professional expenses? And this is usually always a question for a tax advisor. I am not really allowed to answer any specific questions on this because I'm not a tax advisor, but in general, is any cost related to your professional freelance work. And since all freelancers are very different and work in different fields, this is a very case-by-case thing. If you work as a dog trainer, then you probably need to buy dog food for your professional freelance work. So this is, of course, included in your professional costs. If you're a teacher, you probably need to buy teaching material. So this is a deductible cost. If you are, if you're running an ice cream shop, you have to buy ice cream to sell. So it's a deductible cost. What's a little bit difficult often is if you have costs or expenses that you use both privately and professionally. Especially, of course, the classic example of working from home. And according to the German tax law, any costs that you use at the same time, professionally and privately, cannot be deducted from your income. But if you have a special designated room in your apartment that you only exclusively use for your professional work, the costs for this part of your apartment can be deducted. But any part of your apartment that is used both privately and professionally cannot be deducted. So as just a general rule. There's also another special thing that I just wanted to mention. You can also deduct costs for so-called entertainment expenses. And this means you're inviting your business partners for a meal. So maybe to discuss your next project or so. And this is also a cost that you can use, in your tax declaration as professional expenses. But the important thing for you to remember is that you have to ask for a special receipt, the so-called Bewirtungsbeleg, the kind of proof of entertainment, so to say. And this is a special receipt that you can just ask at the restaurant. Every restaurant can give you this official Bewirtungsbeleg. So these are just like some general things that you need to know. You're only paying income tax on your profit, and in your income tax declaration, you can include your professional expenses that you deduct from your income. So let's look a little bit more into detail how much income tax people living in Germany actually need to pay. In general, there is an income tax-free threshold or allowance, which is set at 10,347 euros this year. It was actually a little bit increased a few months ago because of the inflation. And this threshold increases every year. So next year, it's going to be a little bit higher, maybe a lot higher, who knows. So if your profit as a freelancer, or in general, if all of your income is below this threshold, you don't have to pay any income tax. If your taxable income, if your profit as a freelancer plus any other income you have is higher than this threshold, then you have to pay income tax. And here are just some examples of the average income tax rates. So if you declare that your total combined profit income was 15,000 euros this year, then your income tax rate will be roughly 6%. So you'll be paying 900 euros in income tax, and so on and so on. So again, these are just very rough examples. There's also an online calculator that you can use to get more detailed numbers. But yeah, just as a kind of general idea of how much income tax you need to pay. One really important thing, which kind of relates to the very beginning of this workshop, is this special scenario of working both as a freelancer and as an employee at the same time or in the same tax year. The really important thing for this kind of hybrid status is that there's only one income tax rate and only one income tax allowance threshold for your combined income from all income sources. So you don't get 10,000 euros for freelancing and 10,000 euros from employment, but you only get this one allowance, 10,347, for everything combined. And that also means that your profit from freelancing will retroactively increase the income tax rate that's applied to your salary from your employment contract. So, because we remember from the very beginning, if you're an employee, your income tax is automatically taken out of your salary by your employer every month. You already paid it. But your employer doesn't know that you're also a freelancer on the side. So, but once you declare that you have this additional income from freelancing, the income tax rate for everything will be recalculated, and you will have to pay more income tax on your salary as well. So if you're a hybrid worker, employee and freelancer at the same time, it's always good to put some money on the side as well, because you usually will have to pay more income tax after you file your income tax declaration. There's one little exception for this rule, this kind of hybrid rule. If your employment is only a mini job, and if you also specifically said that you don't want to pay pension insurance contributions via this mini job will completely disappear from your income tax calculation, and it will not have any influence on your income tax rate. But this only applies for mini jobs, meaning maximum salary 520 euros, and you actively must tell your employer that you don't want to pay any pension insurance via this mini job. Yeah, so this is just very important, I think, to know. Many freelancers have made this mistake before. They didn't know about this, that everything will be combined. There's only one income tax rate, one combined rate for everything. So this is just really important. All right, so, and I think now questions on income tax.
Yes, we have a lot of questions. I just ask you the questions, and maybe you can just say if it's too detailed or like the people in tax advisor or something, but I just ask them.
I will probably say you have to talk to a tax advisor quite often now.
Yeah. Okay, so one question, is a freelance tax number different from a regular tax number?
Yes, it is. As I explained earlier, there are these 3 tax numbers in Germany. You have your tax identification number, which you got automatically without having to do anything. It's an automatic process triggered by registering as a resident in Germany. So once you have your Anmeldung, you get a letter with your tax identification number. This number can never be used to send an invoice. It's not used for freelancing, but it's only used in the context of employment contracts. If you want to work as a freelancer and send an invoice to your clients, you have to register your freelance activity with the tax office online via the Fragebogen zur steuerlichen Erfassung. And then you get another letter from the tax office with your freelance tax number. And this is the number that you need to invoice and to be a freelancer. The third one is the international VAT ID number, which is only used for cross-border international invoicing between businesses in the European Union.
Okay, can you maybe switch to the slide again? Then the people, because like there's one question that for the different IDs in Germany.
Here we go.
And, the other question is, I think it's answered with this slide, because I'm an artist selling pictures in America and England. Which tax number do I use? I think it could be answered by.
In this case, you are not, if you don't have business clients in the European Union, because both the UK and the US are not part of the European Union. So you would just need your freelance tax number, the one in the middle here, the Steuernummer.
Okay, cool, perfect. Do grants need to be taxed? I have a grant which is not taxable. What should I say to Finanzamt? Sorry.
No problem. That's a huge question because it depends on the grant. I would say send us an email, and then we can check. You just tell us what the grant is, and we can hopefully send you a little bit more information on that. yeah, that's too detailed for now or for tonight, I'm afraid.
Okay. The other question is, are we free from paying taxes as temporary protected refugee for a while?
No, you're not. Because once you register as a resident in Germany, you also become a tax resident at the same time.
Okay. If I got a scholarship and it's not taxable, should I pay something from that money or not?
It depends on the scholarship, unfortunately. Every scholarship is different.
I have another question to I've seen another question to scholarships. I just added now. I'm an employee and company deals with my taxes. I didn't start to work as freelancer yet, but I got a scholarship which is not taxable. Should I pay something from that money from scholarship?
Depends on the scholarship.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry.
No, it's good.
Yeah.
Do I have to pay taxes if I entered a university? I'm 32 years old, registered in Germany since I left Ukraine.
Well, it depends on what you do. If you're earning money, then probably yes. And if you're an employee, again, it's automatic. You don't have to do anything. Your employer does it for you, so to say. It automatically deducts income tax from your salary and then pays you what's left. And if you want to work as a freelancer, then basically what I just said, you need to declare your profit, the amount of money that you have left from your freelance activity after deducting your costs. And then you have to tell that to your tax office. And if your total combined income is below the tax-free allowance of about 10,347 euros, then you don't have to pay any income tax.
Okay. And the other question is, how much percent could be productive cost from income?
Maybe this refers to the professional expenses, like how much you can deduct. Well, it really depends on your activity. A lot of businesses deduct more than 100%, and that means they're not making a profit. They're making a loss. And this is quite standard, especially for larger businesses like startups, for example. But if you're a solo freelancer, then it's quite important that you start making a profit at some point, maybe at least in year number 3 of your activity, because otherwise the tax office will maybe say that what you're doing is just a hobby and that you're trying to get some taxes back maybe by falsely actually declaring it as a freelance activity. This can be a problem. But if you're making a profit, then no problem. It really depends on your specific activity.
Perfect, thank you. Other question, if I need to buy a synthesizer for my performance, can I cut it from my tax?
You can, but maybe the synthesizer is a bit too expensive to deduct it from your income tax in an entire year. This is a really good question because it also concerns other so-called investment goods or assets, like a laptop as well or an expensive camera. I think the threshold is about 800 euros, but you would need to double check that. So basically every object that you buy that costs more than 800 euros cannot be deducted in a single year, but across multiple years, because you're also using it not only in 1 year, but over the course of multiple years.
Okay, great. Is the Kleinunternehmen limit of 22,000 euros determined by their gross income or profitable income?
We'll come to it in the next section, but what's really important for you, Kleinunternehmer has nothing to do with income tax. It's on the other tax planet. It's on the planet of value-added tax. And that works completely differently. For income tax, again, the threshold is not 22,000 euros, but for income tax, the amount for 2022 that you need to know is 10,347 euros. If your total combined income is below that, no income tax for you.
Okay, cool. There are two questions that I'm not really sure if I get it, but I just read it. Should all this money be paid from bank card or should it be paid by tax?
There's two possibilities to pay income tax. First possibility is you transfer the money to the tax office's account. So you do it yourself via your online banking system, for example. The other possibility is you give the tax office the authority to access your bank account. And then they take it out of your bank account automatically. It's up to you. You can choose both, either one of those two options.
Okay, cool. What means special check with partners for dinner?
It means the Bewirtungsbeleg here. Let me go to that. So this is just a possibility for you to deduct costs, to lower your income or your profit, if you're also taking out business partners or project partners for a meal, and if you're paying for it. So, and then this is also considered a professional expense for you. And in order to have official proof of this, you have to ask the restaurant for a special receipt, the so-called Bewirtungsbeleg.
Okay, I have like 7 more questions to this topic. I don't know if I should ask them now or should we proceed and then ask them all together later, or
maybe we still have 17 minutes, so I think we're pretty okay in time.
Okay.
I don't know, up to you.
Yeah, I just ask them now.
Okay.
If I work part-time and freelance, would my total income of those two activities sum up for the tax-free threshold, or only my freelance activity separate?
They're both combined. You only have one income tax-free threshold for everything combined. The only income that's not included are mini jobs. So your maximum salary is 520 euros, not meaty jobs, but mini jobs. And if you actively told your employer at the mini job contract that you don't want to pay into the pension insurance.
Does income tax cover all social taxes?
No, income tax is just the tax that you pay on the money you make. Social security contributions are, again, on a completely different planet. They're extra contributions. And yeah, they are probably also part of the workshop in late November on the Künstlersozialkasse.
Yes. Yeah. Okay, just to confirm. So if your residence is in Germany, but you make other income, you should pay tax on all income only in Germany.
Yes. So as a tax resident in Germany, you have to declare at least your worldwide income. But in some cases, you may also be a tax resident of another country at the same time. And in this case, you will have to file 2 tax declarations in 2 countries. And if those 2 countries have an agreement with each other, so-called double taxation agreement, this agreement says which country is allowed to tax which type of income. So if you're in this situation, then I also can only say you have to find a tax advisor, because these double taxation agreements, they're quite complex.
Okay, cool. And what is the tax number if the clients of the online school are from another European country?
It depends again. Yeah, if they're businesses, maybe it's also, maybe you work with a business in another EU country, then you would need the European Union or international VAT identification number. And if they're private consumers, then it again depends where did they access your online classes. In this case, as I said earlier, you really have to check if you maybe have to invoice them, not according to the German system, but according to the system of the country where they are located. So with the value added tax of the other country, and maybe also with a tax number of the other country.
The other question is what minimum should be that it not called as hobby?
So yeah, maybe just to repeat what I said earlier, once you're making a profit, so once you're earning money, usually the tax office is very happy. They won't trouble you at all. The problem is more if you're constantly reporting that you're not even making a profit, but that you're losing money. In this case, the tax office may suspect that it's just a hobby.
Okay. I'm not sure if I get the other question. Can you participate in a project takes physically place in other country? Let's say I participate in a performance for a few days, but you are a German resident. Can you do this kind of job?
Send us an email because that's our speciality. That's exactly what we do with touring artists. We advise on cross-border mobility to and from Germany. So this is a really good question, but I think we don't have time to answer it. So you can just email us, book an individual consultation, because there's a lot of things that you need to know about this.
Okay. Isn't it true that German freelancer can deduct 300 from the taxes for the Strom?
Well, it really depends again. Like if it's or maybe I think what this question alludes to, I think it's the Energiepreispauschale. So this is a special payment from the German government to counter the negative effects of the increase of energy costs, the so-called Energiepreispauschale, energy price flat rate payment. And yes, it's true that everyone living and working in Germany gets this money, but it's not exactly 300 euros for everyone, but it's actually subject to income tax. So it just gets added to your profit, so to say. And for freelancers, it works a little bit differently because if they're already making advance quarterly payments to the tax office, the 300 euros will just be taken out of that. So you're paying less income tax in advance. But if you're not doing that yet, then this money will be paid to you or will be kind of recalculated next year when you declare your profits, when you file your income tax declaration. So again, if you're not making these advance payments yet, then you have to wait for it. You will not get it now, but you will probably not get it until the summer next year.
Okay, perfect, thank you. If I sell my art on the market for cash, how do I actually declare income?
You have to still write an invoice. Even if you receive cash, then you should document whatever you're selling. It's very important. It's also an obligation for you. And I would recommend not taking so much money in cash because it's very difficult to use it as evidence. It's very important if you want to check if you can be insured via the Künstlersozialkasse, because it's very difficult to prove that you're making money if you're just getting money in cash. So I think especially at markets at the moment, a lot of people are also just using small e-card readers, like you can just buy them as a seller. I think they're not very expensive. And your customers at a market can just pay you with their credit card. So I think that's becoming very, very common. And I think it's quite important to do that as well, just for your own sake, because it's much easier for you.
Cool, thanks. I would say we continue. We have a few more questions, but only 10 minutes left. So
okay.
I think
cool. VAT is going to be 6 out of 6, the last topic. Hopefully not the most difficult, but it is kind of one of the most complex topics. So value-added tax, VAT in German, also known as Umsatzsteuer or Mehrwertsteuer, kind of depending on your perspective. So why is it important? As I said earlier, when you sign up as a freelancer, when you register as a freelancer via the Fragebogen zur steuerlichen Erfassung, you can choose, you can opt for your relationship towards VAT as a freelancer, as a self-employed person. And there are two different relationships towards VAT. And I'll show you what those two relationships are. So the first relationship is the kind of standard relationship. That means you are kind of in the VAT system. It means that you charge your clients VAT, or you are subject. Your services, what you sell, is subject to VAT. And in Germany, there are two different VAT rates. The standard or regular rate is 19%, or there's also a reduced rate of 7%. And in the arts and culture sector, this reduced rate is usually applied to licensing if you sell somebody the right to use your copyrighted work, for performances that take place in an artistic context, for ticket sales, for events in an artistic context, or if you're selling original works of art, like unique pieces, not postcards at the market, that would be 19%. And if you're charging your customers VAT, it of course means that you become more expensive, because it's your obligation to add VAT on top of the price that you actually want to charge them. It's then your responsibility to collect the VAT and then forward it to the tax office. So you have this responsibility. You collect it, you forward it. But at the same time, you also have a privilege in this relationship. You have an advantage, because you can claim back the VAT that's included in your own business expenses. So you are entitled to a refund of the VAT that you're paying yourself. So for example, if you want to buy a new synthesizer at a music shop in Berlin, the synthesizer will include 19% VAT. But in this relationship, you can get the VAT back, so that you're only paying the so-called net price. So you have this responsibility, but at the same time, you have a privilege. And this relationship to VAT is usually recommended for freelancers who have mostly business clients that are also subject to VAT, that are in the same relationship. Because for them, it doesn't matter that you're adding VAT on top, because they have the same privilege that you have. They're buying your service as a business expense, so they can get the VAT refunded that you charged them. It can also make sense for you to be in this relationship if you invest a lot of money in your activities and have a lot of expenses, because then you get this privilege. You only pay the net price and you get all the VAT back that's included in your expenses. So this is number one. You can go for that. If you go for that in your first year of working as a freelancer, important thing to know is that you cannot change. If you opt for this relationship, you're stuck with it for 5 years. No going back. Let's look at relationship number 2. This is basically the other way around. So you can also opt for the so-called Kleinunternehmer regulation. So Kleinunternehmer, maybe just as a recap, is not a name for your status or your legal entity or your business, but it describes your relationship towards value-added tax. And Kleinunternehmer means that you're not part of the VAT system. So you don't charge your clients VAT. In English, I think it's also often called you are exempt from VAT. You're not in the system. But it also means that you don't have this privilege. You cannot claim back the VAT that's included in your business expenses. You don't get a refund. You pay the full price for the synthesizer at the shop. And the really important thing for this relationship is that there's a condition or like a requirement attached to it. And this is where this magic number of 22,000 euros comes into play. So in order to remain a Kleinunternehmer in the next calendar year, you always have to check how high your turnover, your Umsatz was. Umsatz, in this case, your like the amount that you invoiced before you deduct your expenses. And if it was less than 22,000 euros in year 1, you can remain a Kleinunternehmer in year 2. If you stepped over the limit in year 1, you automatically go to the first relationship, but not immediately, but starting on January 1st of the next year. So it always, in a way, defines your relationship to VAT for the next year. 2 important things regarding the 22,000 euros. First of all, it applies to your combined turnover from all of your freelance activities. So if you have 2 tax numbers, you only have one 22,000 limit for everything combined. What's not included in the limit is, of course, all of the money that you make from employment contracts. Your salaries is not included in the limit. The other important thing is, if you start your freelance activity at some point during the year, so not on January 1st, but let's say on November 1st, then your individual limit for this year is not 22,000 euros, but a smaller amount, the proportional amount that's left for the last 2 months of the year. So in this case, if you start your freelance activity on November 1st, you would need to calculate. You would divide 20,000 euros by 12 calendar months, then multiply it by 2, and your individual limit for the rest of the year would only be around 3,700 euros. So if you step over the limit of your individual limit of 3,700 in this year, then you will automatically become subject to VAT next year. This relationship towards VAT can make sense if you mainly have private clients or other Kleinunternehmer clients, because then you're in the same relationship. Nobody has to deal with VAT. It also can make sense to limit bureaucracy and if you don't have a lot of business expenses. If you're just freelancing on the side, it's very standard to opt for this relationship because you don't have to do so much. You're completely outside of this tax world. There's another possibility to be completely exempt from VAT, not Kleinunternehmer as a reason, but another 2 reasons. There's a few more, but just 2 I want to quickly go into. Some artists can apply for a special exemption from VAT. These are only performing artists, so those on stage, stage choreographers, and stage directors. So they will have their own individual reason for not charging VAT, and they don't have to care about any limit. So the 22,000 doesn't apply to them. Teachers can also apply for a special exemption from VAT. And it works basically the same. You don't charge your clients VAT, but you cannot claim back the VAT that's included in your expenses. But for both of these special exemptions, artists and teachers, you actually need to apply for a certificate. You need to get an official letter saying you meet the conditions for this exemption. And last thing, because we already touched on it a little bit, and I'm not going to go so much into detail, when you invoice outside of Germany, it becomes very complex very quickly. Because for invoicing outside of Germany, across borders, there are special VAT rules. It depends what you sell, if it's services or goods. It depends if your clients are businesses or private consumers. And for private consumers, it also often or usually depends on where you deliver a service or where you ship goods to. So if you have transnational, international clients, then we always recommend to get advice, get tax advice, or for a general orientation on what the general rules are, especially for the arts and culture sector, you can email us because that's our specialty. Okay, and I think that's it with the presentation. 2 minutes late, I'm sorry, but I think it's okay. I still have time, so we can totally have time for more questions now. But I just wanted to say, yeah, thank you as well for coming.
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you a lot, Sebastian. Thank you a lot for your great presentation. Yeah, I think we can't answer all of these questions now in this session, but maybe like 2 or 3 more regarding the VAT, if it's fine for you.
Of course.
Yeah. Okay. So one question is, what should I do if I translate for international organizations such as the UN and WHO, which are VAT exempt on the basis of international agreements?
Really good question. I don't know the details of that. I would say get a tax advisor, unfortunately. If for some reason your client is a business located in the EU with an international VAT ID number, then you can go for that way. So then it would basically, you would also need to get your own international VAT ID number, and then you would actually invoice without VAT according to the so-called reverse charge principle, because then the entire responsibility for VAT would be transferred to your client. In this case, by the way, this type of turnover is also then not counted towards your 22,000 Kleinunternehmer limit, because this type of service cannot be subject to VAT in Germany, but in the other country.
Yeah, cool. And there were a lot of questions regarding that last slide that you had, like,
yeah, of course.
And so I think this is just for all of those questions, like, does international VAT work for UK and stuff like that? These
yeah, so maybe just that question. The international VAT ID number is not used in the United Kingdom anymore, because the United Kingdom is not part of the European Union anymore. The only possibility for the international VAT ID number to be used in the UK context is for shipping goods, so physical items, to Northern Ireland, but that's it.
Okay, cool. Yeah, and then I just grabbed one more question. Would voice-over work go under reduced VAT as an artistic performance?
Only if you also sell the licensing rights to it. But otherwise, no.
Okay. Cool. Yeah, I think maybe would it be possible if we just answer like the last questions via email, if we can answer them, and
sure,
then
of course.
send a follow-up email?
Of course, yeah.
I think that would be a good, so we can do a cut here, and even for the interpreters, not that we extend their limits. And yeah, thank you, Sebastian, for your really great presentation and for answering all these questions. And as mentioned, we will send you the presentation in a follow-up email, and we put the recordings in English and Ukrainian on our YouTube channel. And yeah, and we hope that you were able to take some input and knowledge that will help you with your start into self-employment. And yeah, in the next weeks, we will offer some more info sessions. So just check out our event calendar, the program schedule, and I think there are a lot of topics that will help you a lot. So yeah, you can register via our website. There's a link. So yeah, thank you, Sebastian, again. A lot of thanks in the chat, and yes, have a nice evening, all of you, and thanks for coming. Bye.